All right, so hopefully you guys enjoyed part one of the trade deadline episode. Here is part two. Guys that maybe you didn't think about maybe being moved, but still a possibility. And what this team will look like post trade deadline, it's all here on today's Locked On Blue Jays.
You are Locked On Blue Jays, your daily Toronto Blue Jays podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jays. Thank you for making Locked On Blue Jays your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode is brought to you by SupplyHouse.com. Is the reliable way to get parts fast. Shop for your next plumbing, HVAC, or electrical job and get fast shipping from coast to coast at SupplyHouse.com. All right, everybody, welcome back. Just a couple quick updates before we get into today's episode. Of course, we recovered the trade deadline, part two of our trade deadline coverage here before we get into the full day on Tuesday. And then, of course, we'll have all the recaps afterwards on Wednesday morning for you guys. But Danny Jansen acquired by the Red Sox, obviously. And then Nate Pearson as well goes to the Cubs and Yimi Garcia to the Mariners. Just a quick couple updates. We had live streams going for those. So if you haven't seen those yet, we do a full breakdown on the trades, what happens, where they go from here. And there might be trades that come out this morning that maybe we are live for. Every time that there is a trade, the Locked On Blue Jays will have analysis breakdown right away. I just want to get that out there. Before we get into today's episode, we throw it back to the part two with Dallon Wilton, myself, and Carter first. Thanks for listening, guys, and make sure you tune into all those live streams. And they should be up there post-live stream as well, so you can go back and rewatch them even if we're already done with the live stream. Thanks again for watching. We really appreciate it. So we are back here for part two. Of course, we have Carter first, myself, Braden Iwasco, and special guest from the first episode, Dallon Wilton. You can find me on Twitter, Braden5Iwasco, Carter on Carter First 2, and Dallon Wilton at Dallon Wilton. We make it pretty easy on you guys to find us if need be. Of course, hopefully you guys enjoyed the episode with Johnny that came out on Friday from Gate 14. It was, well, I don't know. We recorded this before, but it was probably a blast. The guy's electric. So, boys, we got a lot still to get into, a lot to cover before this trade deadline tomorrow. And if there, we saved some time at the beginning of this. Hopefully, if there was any moves made, we will have brought. We probably just broke it down. But also, as you guys know, we will probably go live as well tonight or tomorrow. If any more moves are made, we will have everybody ready to rock. We will be in there chatting everything up. But in saying that, I think let's get right to it, boys. We did the for sure going. We did the likely to go. It's time to get into the possibilities. Who maybe has a bit of a chance of going, I guess. All right, Dal, who do you got in this category? I know it's a bit of a weird one because we still have probably not, but a possibility. So I would say this is more of like your 51% chance of guys moving compared to what we will get into of like your maybe less than 49%, but not quite zero category here. So what do you got for us, Dal?
Yeah, I simply just have one guy here as well, and that is, for me, surprisingly, is Bo Bichette. We've heard a lot of rumors about him getting moved. I mean, the Dodgers are in need of maybe a shortstop or something like that. Is it a guy I want to move? No, not at all. I think Bichette's just having a down year, and he's going to bounce back and be the Bichette we know and love. But, I'm hearing too many rumors, and knowing Atkins and this management, it's not something that, would surprise me, honestly.
Yeah, Del, I don't think that's completely out of the question. I mean, it's something that has been rumored around. In this category, boys, I have a little bit of, I got three guys. I went three here. My first two were a little bit light because I don't think necessarily there's going to be a ton of moves. And this might come back to bite me if there's been a ton of moves made already that we've covered in the segment before this. But ideally, I think there's not ideally. I think that there won't be a ton of moves made. And so for this possibility category, maybe guys that I could see getting moved on the day of the deadline here are Justin Turner, which you guys both had, sort of being a more likely option to go. I just don't necessarily know what he brings to a lineup if that is the case. And in going on from Justin Turner, I've talked about him quite a bit in the last episode. If you guys saw that on Thursday, I believe it would have been. And then the other guy, like Carter, I got Danny Jansen. I don't necessarily know that I want to see him go or this team can survive without him. I mean, if we have to watch a whole season of Alejandro Kirk, I don't know what we're doing here. Another guy I have, which I think you guys might have had a little bit higher, I can't remember, is IKF. I think it's a pretty good possibility. I think there's a lot to be in return with IKF. I think he can provide a lot. His value is at an all-time high right now. And we only have another year of IKF in a season that he might not bring this same effectiveness to. So in saying that, boys, I think let's snap it around a little bit here. We all had a little bit of different options. What are your guys' overall thoughts? Carter, send it to you on sort of the guys we've thrown out there in this one.
Yeah, so for me, Bichette, the injury concerns are a huge thing for me. Obviously, if he doesn't have that calf strain, maybe there is a more likely possibility that he is moved at the deadline. A guy, again, selling low on these guys is never something I'm going to be a fan of, especially with Bichette and his career stats. He has shown that he can be one of the best hitters in the AL. So not necessarily a guy I want to see moved. IKF, obviously a guy that I talked about in this first episode. I see this as being very likely. I think that they should be shopping IKF around because I don't necessarily believe that he will continue to put up these career numbers like he has this season. But is it a possibility? We'll have to see. Is Ross Atkins? It really depends on how Ross Atkins uses this guy. Does he want to be a part of the retool? Does he want him to be a part of the Blue Jays' future? That is something that is definitely up for debate.
Yeah, and I think Dal brought it up in episode 1 of this trade deadline sort of series that we did, that IKF has a ton of value, but not just in a trade value. I think he has a lot of value being on this team if this is something that we can start to see more of. If that swing change really did help him, maybe that's something the Blue Jays really want to bring back for more seasons to come here. And at only 29 years old, he's still got a couple seasons to give. Dal, your overall thoughts and sort of everybody we just sort of broke down a little bit.
Yeah, I just want to go back to Bichette. Like, by no means do I want to undervalue him. Like, if we're trading Bichette, we better be getting, studs, and that's the bare minimum. He's a star. That's what he is. He's having a down year, but I wouldn't necessarily be valuing him right now. Like I said, you need a big return if you're trading Bichette.
Yeah, and that's totally fair. And I think we've covered this. I will get into Bichette more later on down this list. I have some thoughts, but I do want to save them a little bit. Let's get into this. Is the 1% chance to 49% chance of guys leaving. The probably not or unlikely to move. Carter, I've got a few guys here, so I'm going to throw it to you first.
Yeah, I only have 2 guys for this one, as Dal has mentioned in the previous episode. This is where I have Chris Bassitt. Chris Bassitt does have another 1.5 years left on his contract. Dal talked me into it a little bit on that last podcast, but again, do I see them likely doing this? Not necessarily. They have been very adamant that they are not going to move on from guys that have multiple years left on their contracts. But have the Toronto Blue Jays front office lied to us before? They absolutely have. They're not going to let their clear intentions go, which is probably a good thing for the Blue Jays. It might drive up the price on these guys a little bit more. Chris Bassitt's going to be a guy that will be a huge contender, a huge piece to any contending team. Has shown that he can be very adaptable, can come out of the bullpen if he needs to, can go on 6 days rest, can go on 5 days rest, 4 days rest, whatever you need. Chris Bassitt, he is a certified vet in the MLB. He can really do it all. And again, a guy that if the team wants to extend him, it probably won't be a huge contract, obviously with Chris Bassitt getting up there in age, but he's a guy that's going to have longevity in the MLB, a guy that's not necessarily throwing hard, does not rely on throwing hard. He relies on that pitch mix. He is a strategist of the game of baseball. He knows exactly what pitches to throw in each scenario. When you have a million pitches to throw in these scenarios, definitely makes it a lot easier for you. Chris Bassitt will be a guy, one of the best pitchers on the Toronto Blue Jays this season. He will be a guy that should net a good return. Again, you just can't get fleeced for a Chris Bassitt trade. If you are deciding to move on from Chris Bassitt, you better have a good plan in place. You better be able to get a haul back for Chris Bassitt, whether that's a minor league arm that you want. Maybe it's a bullpen arm if you want to bolster this bullpen a little bit for next season. You don't want to do that all in free agency. Chris Bassitt, again, the starting rotation has the most depth from what I see. Ricky Tiedemann's obviously going to be in that picture. You have Alek Manoah coming back next season. Wyrod, who's looked very good recently. There are a bunch of options. You can, again, sign a lower leverage arm, a guy that could be a 4th or a 5th guy in your starting rotation. With Chris Bassitt, he can have value for a lot of teams. Don't necessarily have him moving. And the other one for me is Kevin Kiermaier. I don't really see it, because if you move Kevin Kiermaier, nobody wanted him off of waivers. That would have been the best opportunity to get Kevin Kiermaier. So I don't really see this happening, but maybe there is a team that wants a defensive replacement. Again, maybe some injuries do happen in these last little bit of days in the MLB here. But Kevin Kiermaier not going to provide you a lot of talent necessarily offensively. Is going to be a massive defensive substitution. So if you want a guy that's going to give you premium defense in tight ball games in the playoffs, he's done it before. He's been in multiple playoff scenarios. Again, I just think that if Kevin Kiermaier was going to be moved, it probably would have happened when he was on revocable waivers. But again, it is an option. Kevin Kiermaier has said that he is going to retire at the end of the season. So you know what you're going to get in Kevin Kiermaier. You would get pretty much nothing back. It'd probably be something like cash considerations or like a single A prospect. Wouldn't be anything crazy. But Kevin Kiermaier is another guy that I do have on this list. Definitely closer to the 1%, like Braden said, but is a possibility to be moved.
Yeah, and I don't think that's crazy, Carter. I think that if the Blue Jays could move on from him, they probably would. As much as I hate to say that, because he is a guy that loves the city. I think the city loves him. But, you get to that point where you're still a baseball team and you're still trying to figure out how to win baseball games. Dal, I'll send it to you for your unlikely but still possibles.
Yeah, like this is maybe 10% likely, but I'm going to throw Kevin Gausman in there. But the price has to be right. If someone's willing to pay a good price for him, I don't see why we wouldn't get rid of him in a sense. You watch the velocity; it's going down. It's down in average this year. Like you got to wonder if this is the peak value for Kevin Gausman right now. Is he going to decline? Is he going to get even higher? You don't know. But if this is the peak for him, you got to think. You got to be scared that he might decline. But if this is the peak, I don't see why we wouldn't trade him and maybe get some pieces back.
Yeah, Dal, I don't hate that. I don't have Kevin Gausman in any of mine here, but I do have a ton more to get into, and then we'll again do as we do sort of open panel here, and we'll have some discussions. To get into my unlikely but still possible, this might irk people the wrong way, or it might get some people really fired up. It is a interesting list to say the least, so I'll get right into that. First off, this is where I have Bo Bichette. I think it's unlikely. I don't think it'll happen, but Rogers and Ross Atkins has surprised all of us in the past. And if the price is right, and the price has to be very, very right, we could see the end of Bo Bichette here. And that might be a hot take, and I totally understand it. I don't think the chance or the probability is very high, but I think it's definitely an option, and an option the Jays are probably listening to. I'm assuming that they're listening to every option, and they will consider literally everything at this point. So I have to put Bo Bichette on there. And if we're talking about guys who have an unlikely chance of leaving, I can't leave this guy off the list. And that is superstar, face of the franchise, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. And I think, yes, it is probably closer to the 1 to 5% chance mark. But it's not something that I could completely throw out of my mind. Because, again, there was speculation earlier this season that Vlad might be on his way out, might be entertaining a trade. Like we saw when he said he wouldn't mind playing for the Yankees. He walked it back. But at this point, they haven't given me a reason to believe that anything's completely off the table. So I have Vlad in there, and I know this is going to spark some debate within us. Him and Bo we're going to have to talk about this, boys. The other couple guys I have here, the last guy or two guys I have in here is, of course, Chris Bassitt. I do have Chris Bassitt in here. I don't think it's a probability, but again, what you two brought up in the past two episodes, I think are very legitimate options. I think that it could happen. There are some teams that are probably looking for him. Yes, the price again is going to be pretty high, but I could see a move happening where they just blow the Jays out of the water and like, oh my goodness, I can't pass up on this trade for Chris Bassitt right now. And I think that's something the Blue Jays have to entertain. I think they have to entertain a lot on a lot of these guys. Do I think that they have to pull the trigger on every single one? Absolutely not. But there should be a little bit of entertaining these questions or calls that they might be getting. The last guy I have as probably not is Alejandro Kirk. If we're debating on who to move, and I don't think you're getting much at all for Alejandro Kirk, don't get me wrong. I think the value is extremely low, But on a team that's maybe looking for a catcher, maybe willing to make a move, I could see Alejandro Kirk being an option. I think they would much rather, if they could get something back, trade him over Danny Jansen. But I think realistically, and I said Danny Jansen was in my possibility category, or my somewhat likely to, I want to say the 51% chance guys. I think Alejandro Kirk has to be in that question. If you're willing to trade Danny Jansen, you have to be willing to trade Alejandro Kirk, because I think in most scenarios, most teams would rather have Danny Jansen. But if you can get maybe something that the Blue Jays are interested in, I think that's a very reasonable ask, is to get rid of Alejandro Kirk and find a replacement, because Danny Jansen, barring any injuries, is your number one guy. Let's open the floor, boys. Let's open the floor. Let's have a little bit of a discussion. There's a lot going on there. Dal, let's throw it right to you. Just on any of these guys brought up, just some extra little comments if you have.
Yeah, I'll throw it to Kirk. I mean, he's the guy I would prefer to leave over Danny Jansen. I don't like Alejandro Kirk at all. He's my least favorite player. But like it sucks, because he's this messiah we thought we had. We thought he was the second coming of Christ, like you say. But he hasn't turned out like that at all, and I hate watching him play baseball right now. I do not like it. And Danny Jansen, he's been in a bit of a slump, but he just excites me more than Kirk does. I think he brings a lot more offensively, and maybe the defense, like throwing out guys and stuff, can be worked on. He's great at blocking balls, but if I'm going long term, I want Danny Jansen over Alejandro Kirk, and I think Kirk's the guy you should part with behind the plate.
The thing with Alejandro Kirk for me, and again, we didn't have this podcast at this time, but we were doing the exact same thing as we were doing right now 2-3 years ago. Obviously, even farther back than that. But with Alejandro Kirk, his best season by far was in 2022. And when Alejandro Kirk was an all-star, that was exactly when I wanted to trade Alejandro Kirk. Just something that I saw with Alejandro Kirk, being a bigger guy, obviously a huge clog in the base paths, a guy that's a contact hitter. When you're a slow runner and a contact hitter, that doesn't usually turn out too well for MLB production. So Alejandro Kirk, I really wanted to sell high on Alejandro Kirk in 2022. Obviously, that did not happen. There was a lot of faith in Alejandro Kirk. He had great defensive skills, a very good framer, one of the best framers in the league. Contact hitter. He was actually hitting line drives at an alarming rate at that point, was looking very promising, but then just went on a huge downfall since that season. And my thing with Alejandro Kirk right now is, what value does this guy have for opposing teams? A guy that's not going to hit for a lot of power, a guy, again, that is a huge clog in the base pass. We have seen that throughout the last 3 seasons with the Toronto Blue Jays, is that there's balls that pretty much any other player in the MLB is going to score on in the outfield, and Alejandro Kirk is going station to station. So it's tough to see it's tough to see for me a trade for Alejandro Kirk. It's because who's going to want this guy? A guy that, again, has not really found anything since that 2022 season. A guy that is hitting about 220 right now, just does not seem to catch any fire whatsoever. A guy that doesn't even seem to be hot and cold. He'll have one game where he seems like the greatest hitter of all time, but then right after that, he'll go on a stretch where he'll go like 3 for 30. So with Alejandro Kirk, I would love to see him moved. I think I'm on the same boat as you guys. I think Danny Jansen is the better player than Alejandro Kirk. I just don't see where the value is with Kirk. I don't know if I want to trade Alejandro Kirk for some prospect that probably isn't going to turn out anyway. With Alejandro Kirk, I think for a rotational catcher as your second catcher, that is the perfect spot for him until he wants to prove something else. A guy that doesn't strike out a lot, a guy that has a good eye. But again, the contact with slow running, not necessarily something that I see other MLB teams being interested in. So I don't really see that as being a possibility. But if you can get a decent haul for Alejandro Kirk, I'm definitely not opposed to that.
For sure. And today's episode is brought to you by Stitch Fix. You know that instant confidence boost you get from an outfit that makes you look really good? That's what I get with Stitch Fix. With Stitch Fix, you get a stylist who understands your style, size, budget. They do all the shopping for you. It's the easiest way to update your wardrobe this season. I just give my stylist my size, style, budget preferences. I order boxes when I want to and how I want to. No subscription required, and they send 5 just for me pieces, plus outfit recommendations and pro styling advice. I keep what works and send back the rest. Trust me, like I always talk about, all I have in my closet is pretty much baseball jerseys. So that's what I wear 90% of the time. So I could use all the help I can get, and Stitch Fix is there to help me. It makes it all so easy. I don't like to shop, and they save me all that time and effort. Plus, I get outfits that make me look really good. And if you don't love something, just send it back. Shipping, returns, and exchanges are always free. Get started at stitchfix.com/MLB and get $20 off your first fix. That's stitchfix.com/MLB for $20 off. And I did bring up a couple other guys. Let's break it open. Let's talk about this. This is where I have the big man himself, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., the superstar, the face of the franchise. His jerseys are in every shop across Canada. And I have him, yes, a low probability of being traded. I think I'm very unlikely. But it's still there for me. I think we've seen that Rogers and the Toronto Blue Jays as a whole, Ross Atkins, make some not the brightest decisions once in a while, and this could be on the table for a guy that might be trying to make a huge splash. Carter said, I think it was a couple episodes ago, that he'd be writing his death note if he traded Vladimir Guerrero Jr., which I don't necessarily disagree with. But with a guy trying to get some fire back in this organization, I could see a weird scenario where he pulls the trigger on some blockbuster Vladimir Guerrero Jr. trade that maybe, like we talk about, reignites the fans, reignites the thought that he could still do this job correctly. So what do you boys think about this? I've said my bit.
I'll jump right into this. I might be yapping a little bit here on this. So if Vladimir Guerrero Jr. does end up getting traded, where do we go as Toronto Blue Jays fans? What do we have to look forward to? Yes, we have Spencer Horwitz. Yes, we have Davis Schneider. I'm just going to flat out say, Braden, I think you're absolutely insane if you even think Vladimir Guerrero Jr. has a chance of being traded from the Toronto Blue Jays.
You know what? I'm going to argue with you here. Not that I think in any universe that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. should or the thought should be in anybody's brains. I want to put that out there so I don't get comments in the comment section saying, what in the world are you thinking? I'm just thinking, I've known Ross Atkins for we've watched baseball now for, what has it been, 10 years, 8 years, I think I want to say. 8 years of Ross Atkins baseball, and we've seen him make bonehead decisions that I think if one of the three of us were in, we wouldn't have been making. So in my head, right now with this team, with his job on the line, this guy would do whatever he needs to do to get that position back. And if it's a blockbuster, crazy deal to ignite the fans, to ignite passion back into this Toronto Blue Jays organization, I think that would be a move that this bonehead Ross Atkins would make.
So you're coming from a standpoint where you don't want to see him go, but you think Ross Atkins is dumb enough to actually make a trade for Vladimir Guerrero Jr.
Yes, sir.
I'd agree with him on that, yeah.
Okay, so this is where I'm at again with the Vladimir Guerrero Jr. stuff. This guy gets so much hate, and it is unbelievable. This guy is 25 years old, and since he's been a full-time starter, he has not had a season with less than 26 home runs. He's 25. Like, this guy is not even in his prime yet, and he is younger. We went over this in another podcast. Spencer Horwitz is older than him. Bichette's older than him. I think Davis Schneider, they're very close. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's within months. So Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is still a very young player. And we've talked about this. I've compared it with the Mookie Betts trade time and time again. And there is a million other trades that you can go over. You can go over the Juan Soto trades, maybe not the one for the Nationals, but Juan Soto being traded to the Yankees. All of those Yankees players, other than maybe Michael King, they're probably not going to amount to a whole lot. So usually on these huge blockbuster trades, especially for superstars, you're not going to get the return you want no matter what. And the only way that I don't think there's any scenario that I'm going to be okay with the Vladimir Guerrero Jr. trade. But the only way I could even start to fathom it is they get the biggest overpay that my two eyes have ever seen in my entire life. They are going to need to get like top prospects, MLB talent. This must be like a 1-for-6 trade. It's going to have to be the craziest thing that I've ever seen. If you trade Vladimir Guerrero Jr., you are losing so many fans. You are losing so much hope in the Toronto Blue Jays organization. If Ross Atkins actually does pull this move, I think it would be absolutely insane. He's probably going to be burned at the stake in Canada. He might actually have to deport himself and move somewhere else because he is not going to have a good chance of surviving in just all of Canada, no matter where you go, especially downtown Toronto. So you look at Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Yes, you could get a huge haul back for him. This is the guy that you should be building around. Just looking at it recently, his 5 home runs in 6 games. He's starting to hit those pull side home runs again like he was in 2021. Yes, I'll be the first one to say it. 2021 might be his peak, might have been his best year of his career. But saying that, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is going to be a guy that's going to hit 30, 35 home runs, going to be a centerpiece of your team. So the fact that it's even in the question, again, I know you don't want him to be moved. I just don't. I think it'd be the biggest bonehead move, honestly, in debatably Toronto Blue Jays history if you move on from Vladimir Guerrero Jr. in this situation.
To be honest with you, Carter, this might not, if this move was ever thought of, I want to say even an inkling of thought in Ross Atkins' head, it would be the dumbest move in the last 10 years of Major League Baseball. I don't think that that's a question mark unless the haul is unbelievable to the point where I'm sitting in the grass praising Jesus Christ himself. There is no move that would equate to me being happy about this Vladimir Guerrero Jr. trade. And I don't think it'll happen. But Dal, what do you think? Me and Carter have, gone on our little rants. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, you guys said it perfectly. If Ross Atkins makes this move, his job's gone, 100%. It's like Carter said, you're not going to get any younger, and you're not going to get any better, really. Like he's an all-star. All-star for the AL, starting first baseman this year. You're not going to get much better than he is. And like Carter mentioned again, we've been seeing some flashbacks, if you want to call them, to that star year he had. He's starting to hit the ball better. He's really finding himself now. And I think, the start of the season was slow for him. And I bet you he turns it up in these years to come. He's a guy that you have to center your franchise around. He's a guy that you lock up long term. You give him the money that he wants, because like I just mentioned, you're not going to get any better really than what you have right now. He's our superstar. You're going to lose fans. You're going to lose the trust of everyone. And, if he thought that this would ignite his team, he's wrong. The only thing igniting is himself. He's going up in flames if he makes this trade.
Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is the prospect you want every single player to turn out to be. He has done everything and more for me, for this country. He is the face of the franchise. He loves being the face of Canada. He loves being in that spotlight. And just to move on from Vladimir Guerrero Jr., for me, it's just, I'll say it a million times. I'll fight tooth and nail for this point here. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. should be a Blue Jay for life. I don't care if he wants $35 million a year, $40 million a year. You don't get a lot of superstars like this that want to stay in Canada long term. So you have the ability to extend Vladimir Guerrero Jr. I think that's exactly what you should do.
100%, Carter. I agree. And I you know what? I honest to God, I can't remember. Did we finish going over the possiblies, or possibly not, or probably not, whatever you want to call it, this 1% to 50 or 49%?
We got Bo Bichette and Chris Bassett sort of getting. Do we have touched a lot on Chris Bassett?
Yeah.
So I guess we should kind of go into the Bo Bichette stuff again. With Bo Bichette, we've sort of covered this again in other episodes. Bo Bichette, for me, the exploration of the trade has to be, again, Bo Bichette hasn't necessarily said he wants to be a Blue Jay for life. He hasn't necessarily, again, it doesn't have to even be Blue Jay for life, just a contract extension, whether that's 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, even 2 years for Bo Bichette, I'm definitely taking. But again, I've said this multiple times on this podcast already, but I just want to drill this into the listeners' heads. You guys can disagree with me if you want, but with Bo Bichette, he's the type of player that is going to bounce back next season. You know that for a fact. I would bet money on it right now. I'd bet the house on it. I bet our apartment that me and Braden are in right now on it. Bo Bichette is going to be a great player. If you move on from him at his lowest point, you're not going to get the haul back you want, unless, again, you got to get this the holy grail of a move, and you need to get a ton of prospects back for Bo Bichette, because again, Bo Bichette is the type of prospect that you want all of your prospects to turn out to be. Again, he's having a down year. There's injury troubles. There might be some mechanical issues there. Not exactly sure what Bo Bichette's problem is, but again, this is not a player that you want to move on from, especially at his lowest point. A guy that you want to build around. Bo Bichette and Vladdy are the faces of this franchise. The only way that I can see a move being made here is if Bo Bichette has given you a little bit of insider information. He's saying, I don't want to be here. I want to be moved. And if you can get the year and a half of Bo Bichette, that's going to get you a lot more than just half a year of Bo Bichette because of that uncertainty. You don't know if he's going to extend with your team. At least he'll have a year and a half to kind of digest what the organization is about, what the teammates about, what the direction of the franchise is. So again, this trade deadline is a huge piece for the Toronto Blue Jays' future, because if they go on this full rebuild, is Bo Bichette going to want to stay for another rebuild? He was supposed to be a part of the rebuild that was supposed to make this team great again. It just didn't really happen. So with Bo Bichette, if he wants to be moved, that's something that they'll have to discuss. If that is the scenario, I think this is the best year to do it. But again, with the injury concerns, with a ton of just uncertainty around Bo Bichette, I don't think you're necessarily going to get the haul that all the fans expect to get for Bo Bichette.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, and there's no doubt in my mind that he'll bounce back, but the question is it going to be with the Toronto Blue Jays? Because to me, it looks like he doesn't want to be there. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was to ask out of Toronto, honestly.
You know what, Dal? That's exactly what my point was for putting him in here. And it was that he hasn't expressed that likelihood of rejoining this team for years to come. And that's what you need. You need guys that can commit to being here, especially the superstars. And if they're not going to be a part of this, then we have to get something for them. We can't let him walk and pray to God that he resigns and then doesn't, because that is just not going to pan out. You're not going to get anything for him. And then you're going to be left with a hole in your lineup that you maybe won't be able to replace. So I think the Bo Bichette thing is more likely than the Vladdy topic. I think the Vlad topic is as close as you can get to a 1% chance. And the Bo Bichette might be a 5% chance. But
Yeah.
I think what Ross Atkins needs to do is understand if Bo Bichette is going to re-sign. Otherwise, right now might not be the most ideal time because he's not playing like you want him to. But it might be the time in the sense that you might not get another shot at trading Bo Bichette.
One more thing I want to bring up kind of on this topic is you go back to last season. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. obviously has struggled, probably one of the worst years with the Toronto Blue Jays. Bo Bichette looked unbelievable. Is this a scenario where we kind of just flip-flopped here, where we were like, oh, now Bo Bichette doesn't want to be here. He's not playing that good. You kind of have the recency bias of Vladimir Guerrero Jr. just hitting nukes. Bo Bichette struggling a little bit. When you go back to 2023, Bo Bichette looked unbelievable. A lot of people saying Bo Bichette plays the more premium position at shortstop. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., you can find first baseman a lot more easily. Do you think that we're kind of getting into this recency bias that we're just favoring Vladimir Guerrero Jr. just because he's doing good right now?
Absolutely, that's part of it. You're 100% right. And as Blue Jays fans, I think we see it on a daily basis because we are on this podcast talking about it. And we are seeing the comments that everybody's leaving. Sometimes, we might not get back to them right away, but we try to keep up with everything that you guys are saying, and we see everything. We see the flip-flop that was last year to this season in the Bo Bichette hate. The Vladimir Guerrero Jr. hate at the beginning of the season was immaculate. Everybody thought he was going to be a bum. And then he comes out and he's playing like an absolute freak of nature. So 100% that's part of it. And I think a little bit of me talking about this trade deadline also thinks, hey, we got to take a step back here. This is a good baseball team. Some years it's just not your year. In saying that, there needs to be moves made to improve this club, evidently. But is the move to move on from two of your best players to ever grace the Toronto Blue Jays baseball field? I don't think that's the right play either.
For me, in that aspect of things, like I don't think it's been a problem with myself, like seeing that Vladdy doesn't want to be there. I think he wants to be there. He's like very lively in that dugout. Even when Teoscar and Lourdes were around, like those guys are always chatting, always laughing, always having fun. It seems like Vladdy's always having fun. So I think he loves Toronto. And it's different for Bichette. For me, it just looks like he doesn't want to be there. But for me, but Vladdy does want to be there. In my eyes.
Yeah, that's part of it too. And I've talked endlessly about the attitude that Bo Bichette brings onto the baseball field. It's like it's not a not caring. I don't want to say that it's not caring, but it's unenthused is how I'll put it. I think he looks very deadbeat. He doesn't look like he's having a great time most of the time. Some days I don't even know if he wants to play baseball. That's what it looks like to me. And I think that that's a brutal part. And maybe that's what's leading to these conversations. And I know I've been flip-flopping even in this conversation about my feelings on Bo Bichette. I think he's an amazing player when he wants to play good and he wants to give his full attention to baseball. But when he doesn't, he looks like what we have this year. Somebody that's unenthused, that's not there, that's not mentally. That we talk about the mentality of a baseball player all the time, right? That it's a 90% brains, 10% physical, whatever. It might have changed now, but a little bit. But that's part of it. It's such a huge mental game. And for me, Bo Bichette has not mentally been with this team since probably first pitch of the season, it seemed like. He just hasn't been there. So, yeah, Dal, I think that's a pretty fair point. It's the wanting to be a Toronto Blue Jay. And I think he's not really showing that right now.
I'm gonna kind of go against you guys here. I don't think you can tell just by the body language that Bo Bichette doesn't want to be a Toronto Blue Jay. I think all of that body language is because the Toronto Blue Jays aren't a good baseball team right now. Bo Bichette wants to be on a good baseball team. He wants to be on a baseball team that's succeeding. I'm gonna kind of throw out like this. Only the insiders are gonna get this one. You guys are kind of sounding like some Randy takes right now. I don't like the luscious locks. He doesn't look like he's actually gonna be here right now. He actually doesn't want to be on the team. I think that's more of like an older person take. I think that's more of an adult take. Like my dad hammers this, all of his brothers hammer this, even my brother hammers this. But again, Bo Bichette, I think it's very hard to read just off people's like body language interaction, especially when everything that could have went wrong in the Toronto Blue Jays season has gone wrong. So with Bo Bichette, the only wavering thing I have for this is that Vladimir Guerrero Jr., even in 2023 when he was struggling, he has expressed his interest in wanting to be a Toronto Blue Jay. When you look at Bo Bichette, he hasn't expressed that interest. So again, I just think the attitude thing with Bo Bichette isn't necessarily something that I'm worried about. I just think that Bo Bichette's struggling, and he's more worried about himself struggling and his performance actually on the field rather than not necessarily caring about the game of baseball, caring about the team. Again, maybe there is some selfishness in there. It's hard to read for me as a surface level, just looking at Bo Bichette. I think it's kind of unfair to say that Bo Bichette doesn't want to be a Toronto Blue Jay because he hasn't explicitly said that he wants to be a Toronto Blue Jay, but he hasn't said he doesn't want to be a Toronto Blue Jay either. But again, you're on a baseball team. You're probably not going to say you don't want to play for that baseball team. But Brayden, it looks like you got something to say here, so I'll throw it back over to you.
Yeah, I do, because we have this argument, me and you, I think we go back. This is the one thing me and you go back on forth with the most. And that's the attitude of baseball players, the mentality aspect of it, of showing your emotion, right? Some players show their emotion. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is a perfect example of that. You can tell exactly what he's going through every single day because he shows it on his face. Bo Bichette is not that guy. He's very deadpan, very emotionless, honestly, on the baseball field. He's saw a couple times like that, where though. Absolutely. I'm not saying he's not been, but there's a certain point where there's something that changed. And I've seen something this season that has changed for me. It's not the classic Bo Bichette. It's like he just doesn't, not that he doesn't care. Again, that's not the right thing. That's not the right words to put into this conversation. If it's unenthused, if it's whatever, Carter, and what I want to throw out with you can't tell based on somebody's body language, Carter, and the mentality part of the game. We were golfing today. I was having a terrible, terrible, terrible front nine, right? It was horrible. It was absolutely.
You and Bo Bichette are very similar athletes, so let's just throw that out there.
Not surprising.
But that's not part of it. I was mentally out of it. You could tell I wasn't in the game, and I was shooting horrible. It started right from hole 2, I think, that I was playing bad. We go to and yeah, that whole athlete thing, Carter, shove it. All right. But then you go and we go to the back nine. The mood changes. We start joking around. I'm in a good mood. I'm shooting well, and then I had my best back nine of the season. And it's totally emotion, the mentality of the game. I don't care what sport you're playing. If you're pissed off, you're not going to play too well, right? You got to be mentally involved. That's a staple of any athlete. You have to be mentally there, and Bo Bichette is not mentally there. And yeah, the old people or whatever you want to say, maybe you throw me into that conversation, but when I see Bo Bichette not mentally in the baseball game, in a game that's 90% mental, something's wrong.
See, my argument against that is you see guys getting thrown at. Like earlier this year, I can't remember off the top of my head, somebody gets thrown at. And then next, I think it was Jurickson Profar got thrown at. And then whoever was behind him just hits a nuke. And you can see the emotion on Jurickson Profar's face. And then again, Bryce Harper a couple of years ago gets thrown at. The next time he's up to the plate, hits a home run. So again, you use that aggression. I think you can channel that positively. Again, the mental part of the game, I'm not discrediting that. That is a huge part of the game. You want to be in a good mental space. If you're going to go up to the plate and think you're going to get out, you're probably going to get out. You want to be high confidence. You want to think you're going to crush the baseball. So again, the mental part is a big part of the game. I just don't know if you can make an assessment of, does Bo Bichette want to be here? Does he not want to be here? Just based off of this season. Because that's where it's seeming, like you said, from the first pitch of this season, not his entire career with the Blue Jays. I think when things are going wrong, it's hard to be positive about the baseball team.
I just think, like, I don't know. I kind of got to side with Brayden. Like, I'm a big attitude guy as well. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't recall Bo Bichette. He's always had that big swing, but I don't remember him swinging at these garden hoses, like sliders out of the zone. It just looks like he doesn't care. He's just going, oh, maybe I'll hit it. Like, that's what it looks like. And it's frustrating to watch. He can't channel any emotion he has because he can't hit a baseball. So like, where is he going to put that emotion? It's crazy to me how, things are going bad and you look that depressed out there on the field.
Maybe
Yeah.
that's why the calf is just blowing out for Bichette. All that stress just going straight to his calf muscle.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
that's the only. Well, he's not putting it in the baseball, so
Exactly. And a bit of that is there's guys, and I know we've talked about the mentality of the game, and maybe this is a conversation for another day and not the trade deadline, but we sort of got into it. So, we got into it. That's why we have this episode. That's why we sort of made this into this sort of production, was to have these conversations. And again, we're not Bichette. We're not Vladimir Guerrero Jr. We're not, I don't know, Tim Meza, but we are guys that have also all played sports our entire life at pretty high levels. And Dal, I mean, not to throw you under the bus here or nothing, but Dal is a guy that you can read the emotion on his face, doesn't matter what sport he's playing. If he's out on the mound pitching, you can tell when he's not having his best stuff. Or if he's behind the plate throwing guys out, taking control of the infield, you can tell. And that's, we've all been athletes. We've all been there. We all know that the attitude that you bring to the diamond or to the rink or to the basketball court, it translates into your game. So that seeing the no emotion on Bichette, yes, it's always been that way. But at some point when it's not going well, you got to change something. Bring some energy, bring something. Fire your team up. You're supposed to be a leader. You're supposed to be the superstar. And again, I don't want to make this into a slander episode on Bichette, but it's getting frustrating. And if nothing changes and there isn't that want to be a Toronto Blue Jay, getting back to the topic at hand here, maybe a move isn't the worst scenario here. I don't know what you get in return. The return's probably crap, and maybe it's not worth your time. But if you let him walk for free after these next couple of years, I don't know what the other option is.
Yeah, nobody's going to be happy if Bichette does not resign and you get absolutely nothing for him. But I think we're going to have to agree to disagree on this topic. Let us know in the comment section whether you're on my side or you think I'm an idiot. Again, you don't have to just you can be blunt as you want, as we've been pretty blunt on this podcast, obviously. Leave a comment if you think Bichette cares, if he doesn't care, if you want to see him with the future of the Toronto Blue Jays, whether you think I'm right, or do you think Braden and Dal are right. I would love to see where you guys are at with this debate, and maybe we'll make this into its little own episode, like its own video on our YouTube channel and the podcasting streaming platforms, because I think this was a great debate to have. Whether I'm right, whether you don't think I'm right, I love just kind of snapping around with the boys on these topics. But again, we've been kind of talking about this, I think maybe for 20 minutes now. We kind of went off a little bit there. So let's kind of get back into the trade deadline aspect. So I think we're going to move on to the guys just either. Actually, I'll give it back to you, Brain. You got this little structured a little bit better than I do. Okay. The emotion's a little bit too high here.
The emotions are running high.
At least you're showing some.
No, this, honest to God, was a fantastic little segment here. I might cut this up into its own separate one and throw it up, as Carter said, because it's a really interesting piece, I think, just on the mentality of athletes, and maybe taking this a little bit away from the Bichette-ness of it all.
Today's episode is sponsored by Supply House. Get supplies from the site that's made for skilled trades, supplyhouse.com. Supplyhouse.com is the most reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Shop a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands and get your order delivered right to your door with fast shipping from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business, and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get you a competitive edge by joining supplyhouse.com's free Trade Master program. Every Trade Master gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at supplyhouse.com/TM and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at supplyhouse.com.
But we've sort of been through everybody and every category of who we think will leave, who's got a possibility, what are the chances, blah, 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 blah. We got to get into guys that won't be moved whatsoever. And I don't think this has to be something long drawn out. I think that we can sort of hit the nail on the head here, where in saying that these Buffalo guys won't be moved. And yes, there are some exceptions. We've talked about it a little bit in the sense of guys like Ernie Clement, who's a little bit older, who maybe, you know, has had his time. Maybe he's not necessarily being exactly what we thought he was going to be. But in saying that, I think a lot of these Buffalo guys won't be moved. There's a couple other guys I have on here. I never talked about Gosman or Barrios. I think those are two guys that I expect to be back next season with this Toronto Blue Jays team. As well, a couple other guys for me. Dalton Varsho. He's a guy that you just have to keep around. He is the best defender in the league, no doubt about it in my mind. And I think if he continues on this pace, he might be one of the best defensive players maybe to ever grace a baseball field. He is extraordinary. In saying that, his bat is absolutely dead, but that's probably not what you realistically brought him in for. Another thing I have on George Springer's, I don't think George Springer gets moved whatsoever. You guys can debate me here, but I think there's a less than 0% chance that George Springer ever gets talked about in a trade here. Carter, let's throw it over to you.
Yeah, so I'm just going to kind of continue on that. I don't really have a lot to say about George Springer. I don't think anyone's going to want to eat that $25 million contract. Again, he has been one of the best hitters in baseball over the last 21, 22 games, but he is getting older. Is this going to continue on next season? That is a big if. Obviously, you saw how bad George Springer was at the start of the season. You got to think that age might become a problem in his future. So I don't have George Springer being moved. Obviously, Alek Manoah, he's injured. Jose Barrios, again, another guy I think it's fairly unanimous, probably not going to be moved. I actually had Eric Swanson on this list as well. I don't think he has a chance of being moved. I don't think you sell low on Eric Swanson. Alejandro Kirk, another guy, just don't really see the value there. And then the one guy, again, you go with Stuart Baroa, you can go Spencer Horwitz, all these guys, the Buffalo guys probably aren't going to be moved. I have Kevin Gausman as a long shot. I just don't really see it happening. Is it a possibility? Yes. 2.5 years of control. Dal made a good point. Is Kevin Gausman, the age, going to be a problem here? That is something to be debated, but I just don't really see the move for Kevin Gausman. Again, that selling low point. I'm going to stick to that. Don't like selling low on guys that have especially been in Cy Young voting. And this is just kind of takes me to my last one here. I have untouchables, guys that, again, not going to spend a lot of time on this because he really heavily debated this earlier in this episode, but I don't think he moved Vladdy at all. I think it would be one of the worst decisions that Ross Atkins could make. I think Vladdy is the only player on this team that is absolutely untouchable. I think he moved Spencer Horwitz, Dalton Varsho, Davis Schneider, any of those guys over Vladimir Guerrero Jr. This guy is the cornerstone of your franchise. I don't see him being moved whatsoever.
Dal, sending it back to you, some other guys that you have either untouchables or almost a 0% chance of getting moved this trade deadline.
I mean, we talked about this guy before, but like, I don't see IKF moving. Honestly, I don't. We've said it all. I don't see Springer moving. I don't see Varsho moving. Vladdy's untouchable for me. Yariel ain't going anywhere anytime soon. All those Buffalo guys aren't going anywhere. But I mean, for me, like, I guess I should have touched on this earlier. Like, I wouldn't be. This is a really hot take, but I wouldn't be surprised, like, if Davis Schneider got thrown in to some sort of deal somewhere. I don't know why, but like, it just wouldn't surprise me.
That is a hot take. I don't necessarily. I think he's one of those guys that you trade when they're playing really good, and I think you're not getting a lot for Davis Schneider right now. And maybe there's some teams that think that they can bring him back to what he was in the past. I think it's just a slump. I could see him definitely coming back next season and being the Davis Schneider that we all know and love. I mean, I have him on the back of my jerseys for Christ's sake. So
it's like a 2% chance. Like, it's not high. It's just I wouldn't be surprised if he was thrown in some sort of blockbuster deal.
Yeah, and I don't 100% disagree with that. I think him and Ernie Clement are two pieces that could bolster a trade if the opportunity presented itself. And I think some teams would jump at the opportunity to get a guy like Davis Schneider, 25-year-old, who they can sort of build around, right? Or not around, but a nice little addition piece to their lineup. A guy that swings for power, that gets on base, knows the strike zone really well, and in 2 years we're going to see that electronic strike zone or whatever they call it, AI umps or whatever. And Davis Schneider will take advantage of that, and because he knows the strike zone so well, just like a guy like Spencer Horwitz knows the zone so well. I think that this is really going to change the game, and especially for guys like them who know the zone so well.
Yeah, Davis Schneider being moved would definitely leave a hole in Braden's heart. I don't know how he would move on with this Toronto Blue Jays podcast if Davis Schneider was moved. Moving Davis Schneider is kind of the same thing for me as moving Bo Bichette, moving Spencer Horwitz, moving Vladdy. The object here for me is to get younger for the retool, or at least get MLB talent. Davis Schneider has shown that he can be a very good hitter. If you're going to move on from Davis Schneider, I am shoving that rookie record down every single GM's throat. This is the guy you're getting. If you want to get this guy, you're going to have to pay for him. But again, I don't really see, I'm going to bring it up again. don't sell low on your guys, especially guys like David Schneider, who is young. I don't see that necessarily being an option. You did say it's like less than 2% chance. So again, probably not something that is going to happen. This would be a trade. If you're going to make this huge blockbuster trade, you probably have to get a huge player in return, probably MLB talent, a guy that will be a superstar. You'd have to throw in David Schneider, probably a lot of other prospects. Again, doesn't really make sense for the Blue Jays the way they're trending right now, but definitely could be a possibility. Not a very high one, as you said. But again, Ross Atkins is a little bit of a wild card. That's why it's very hard to predict what the Toronto Blue Jays are going to do at this trade deadline. Looking at the history, they don't really make a lot of big moves under the Ross Atkins era. You have that Whit Merrifield move that was nice. Jordan Hicks, obviously last year, but nothing that is really like moving the needle as that David Price trade did in 2015. But for me, let's kind of going into the last little part of this segment here. The guys that I just want to see, again, not necessarily even if people are traded, if they're not traded, I obviously had the 4 being traded as Yimi Garcia, Yusei Kikuchi, Justin Turner, and IKF. So the thing I kind of hammered in this first episode is I want to see these Buffalo players. I want to see these young stars have the ability to play. So my roster under all these trades, or just what I would want to see in this second half of the season, I have, again, there's a bunch of different players that you could put in these situations. The lineup's going to change. Obviously, you want these players to hit. But I have Dalton Varsho center field, George Springer / Stuart Baroa in right field. Probably going to be George Springer a lot of the time. David Schneider, and then Nathan Lucas when he comes back. I want to see Nathan Lucas in the big leagues after this trade deadline. Ernie Clement / Aston Barger at third base. Obviously, Bichette's out right now, so Leo Jimenez would take a lot of those shortstop reps. Then David Schneider, Spencer Horwitz, mostly Spencer Horwitz being at two-bag, Vladdy being at first base. I don't want to see Jano go, so I have him at catcher, but the other hand would be Alejandro Kirk. And then the pitching, you would have Jose Barrios. I have Kevin Gausman staying here. You got Wyrod. For the rest of the season, you probably have to throw in Bowden Francis. And then Ricky Tiedemann, I do want to see him at the end of the season. Obviously, has a lot of injury concerns. So again, you make spot starts. At this point, it doesn't really matter who you throw out on the mound. If you want to call up guys from AAA, one guy I have is Chad Dallas that could make an appearance. Cam Eden, another guy who's a center fielder, could be called up. Domingo Palmigiani, another guy, Alan Roden. These guys, again, these would have massive trades. Probably not going to pull up every single prospect for the rest of the season. I'm more focused on getting Spencer Horwitz consistent at-bats. Aston Barger, I want to see what he can do. I want to see what Leo Jimenez can do with a bigger sample size. Just all these young talents. I want to see them actually play on the baseball field regular time.
Carter, might be a little bit of a gripe with this, and for the rest of the season, and I know this is sort of where you leaned into, was, yeah, absolutely. The rest of this season should be dedicated to developing those AAA stars that we've seen so far. Horwitz, Schneider, Ernie, all these guys, right? You want to see what they can do. I agree. I want to see Nathan Lucas up as well as Ricky Tiedemann to get a couple starts. Going into next season, and we're going to cover this post-trade deadline. Don't get me wrong. Maybe we'll have Dal back for that to sort of, recap everything that went on. I think going into next season, this can't be a AAA roster. It really can't be. This team, if their goal is to retool, then boys, it's time to retool. And we're going to have to talk a lot about what's going to happen in the off season as well. There's going to be a ton to talk about. Guys, we've been going here for a ton of time. We have covered everything up, down, from mentality of a baseball player to who's might get traded at this deadline over the past 2 episodes of this deadline special, as we're going to call it. And we really appreciate you guys sticking with us. We hope that you got something out of this. And if there was any moves made that you saw that we obviously would have covered in the first little bit going into this episode here. We just really appreciate you guys sticking with us, taking what we have, maybe with a grain of salt, maybe as gospel. We'll have to wait and see what's going to happen here. Dal, always want to thank you, big guy. This is a late night. It was a bit of a crazy episode, but it was a ton of fun having you on.
Yeah, I love coming on, and I hope I could keep coming back. It's always fun being on here. So
we've sort of gained a good group of people that have come on this podcast so far, and I mean, to you guys who listen and watch, it's been an absolute blast so far. We got still this season to go. Of course, like I said, so much more going into next year is going to be huge over this next little bit. And we're going to have to talk about that. We're going to have to talk about some of the moves. I know a couple people have brought up some guys, so maybe post-trade deadline, we'll get into that again, and decide and sort of have the conversation, decide what is the direction of this team. And I think we'll have a better understanding about that on Wednesday. Carter, anything before we sort of get out of here?
Yeah, you kind of touched on that last piece I wanted to add. It's going to be a lot easier to see like what we need to do in free agency once the trade deadline is finished off, see what they move on from, see what they keep. Again, there's probably going to be holes in this team. That's expected. You kind of want there to be holes in this team at this point. You want to sell your expiring contracts. You want Ross Atkins to do something. I think that is the biggest thing that we are all in an understanding of on this podcast. You don't want to do nothing. You don't want to hold all your players. You want to get something back. And since we've kind of been going at it a little bit on this episode, I think I want to just throw it to one more thing that we all could agree on. If Ross Atkins could be a trade piece, I think that would be the quickest, yes, sir, get the hell out of here that we could all agree on. Because Ross Atkins, for me especially, I know for Braden, probably for Dallon as well, we, I think, have seen his time with the Toronto Blue Jays come and go. We want to see something new, whether that comes in the trade, whether that comes in free agency. Hopefully that comes with a new manager next season. Just we're kind of sick and tired of this Ross Atkins era.
For sure, Carter. Dal, again, huge thanks for coming on. We've been talking your guys' ear off, so we're going to sort of get out of here. Just as a quick thing, we remind you guys to check out the Lock On 24/7 streaming channel, where you can get a ton of information, especially on other teams that you like around this trade deadline. There is a ton, so if a big move has been made by a team, go make sure and check that out with them. Over there, that you can also find it on the Amazon Fire TV's channels app. It is available anytime, 4 a.m., 4 p.m., whatever you guys want. I mean, I'm going to be up at 4 a.m. today, probably editing this episode. So hopefully you guys have had a great time with us, listening to us sort of yap about what could happen with this team. And we're excited to keep doing it for you guys. We've built out a nice roster of characters that appear on this podcast, and we hope that they'll all rejoin us again throughout this season, going into the offseason and into next. Again, really appreciate it, guys. And
I got one more thing just before we do tune out for this episode. It's just live streams. We're again all the trade deadline stuff. Again, hopefully a lot has happened before this Monday episode. But for Monday night, for Tuesday, we will be going live if there is any big moves made. So be sure to be on the watch for that. But yeah, we have been going at it for a while, so we're going to take off for today, and we will see you guys on Tuesday, and hopefully before that with some live streams.